It was a quiet evening in the big music academy where students from rich families came to learn how to play instruments and become famous musicians. The sound of piano keys and violins always filled the air, and even when the lights were dim, the building felt alive with music. In the middle of this beautiful place there worked a man named Mr. Collins. He was not a teacher or a performer, he was the janitor. He cleaned the floors, polished the doors, emptied the bins, and made sure everything was shining before the next day began. He was kind and hard-working, but most people never looked at him twice. They walked past him as if he was invisible, and he never complained. He knew his place and did his work quietly and with pride. Every evening, his daughter Emily came to wait for him. She was 16 with kind eyes and soft brown hair. She would sit in the back of the grand hall near the last row of seats, while her father worked sweeping the floor and cleaning the windows. She was small and shy and always carried a notebook with her where she wrote songs she heard in her head. She had never touched a piano before because they belonged to the school and were too expensive to even dream of playing. But she loved the sound more than anything in the world. When the music students practiced, she would listen closely. Sometimes she could guess the next note just by hearing the way the tune moved. She did not understand how, but it came to her naturally. She often imagined her fingers on the piano moving like theirs, making sounds that could tell a story without words. But she never tried because she knew it was not allowed. The pianos were for the students and teachers, not for the daughter of a janitor. Still, every night when the big hall became empty and silent and her father was busy finishing his work, she would walk slowly toward one of the grand pianos just to look at it. Her heart would beat fast when she saw the smooth black and white keys shining under the dim lights. Sometimes she would lift her hand and hover above them, afraid to touch. Then one night, when she thought her father was far away, cleaning another room, she sat down on the bench. She pressed one key very softly. The sound came out clear and beautiful, and it made her heart jump. She smiled and pressed another, then another. Soon she forgot her fear and began to play the little melodies she remembered from hearing the students. She did not know where to place her fingers properly, but somehow it felt right. The music flowed out of her easily, as if it had been waiting inside her all along. That became her secret moment every night. She waited until the hall was empty. Then she played. Sometimes only for a few minutes. Sometimes for an hour. She learned faster than anyone could believe because she remembered everything she heard. The janitor's daughter, who had never learned music, was teaching herself in the dark. She played softly so no one would hear, but the walls seemed to listen. Her father had no idea what she was doing. He only thought she liked to wait quietly until he finished his work. One day, the academy began preparing for a big concert. Some of the most famous musicians were coming to perform, and many rich and important people from the city were invited. The teachers were nervous, the students were excited, and the janitor was busier than ever, cleaning every corner of the hall. The director told Mr. Collins that everything had to be perfect because the guests included a world-famous pianist named Adrien Leclerc. He was known everywhere for his talent, and he was coming to play at the concert. Emily listened quietly as her father told her about it that evening. She felt curious and excited and asked if she could come with him to watch the rehearsals. Her father smiled and said she could as long as she stayed quiet and did not get in the way. The next afternoon, Emily sat quietly in the back while the musicians practiced. She watched them, closely trying to learn just by looking. Their hands moved so fast, their expressions so full of emotion. She could almost feel what they were feeling when they played. Her heart ached to touch the piano again. When the rehearsal ended, everyone left for a short break, and her father went to check the lights and clean near the stage. Emily stayed in her seat staring at the grand piano, standing alone in the middle of the stage. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and she could not resist the pull. She looked around. The room was empty and silent. She stood up, walked slowly toward the piano, and sat down. Her hands trembled as she touched the keys. She closed her eyes and pressed the first note. The sound was soft, pure, and deep. She took a deep breath and began to play. The music that came out surprised even her. It was not a song she had heard before. It was something new made from her heart. It rose and fell like waves, each note blending into the next, telling a story of quiet dreams and hidden hopes. The empty hall filled with her sound, and it felt alive again. She forgot where she was, forgot who she was, forgot that she was just the janitor's daughter. She became part of the music, lost inside its beauty. Her fingers moved fast and smooth, and her face showed emotion she never knew she could express. When she finally played the last note, she felt light and free. She stayed still for a moment, breathing softly, before she heard something behind her. She turned quickly, and froze. Standing near the door was a tall man with silver hair and a black coat. It was Adrien Leclerc, the famous pianist. He had come back to get his forgotten music sheets and had heard her playing. He was not smiling or frowning, just watching her quietly. She felt her face burn and stood up quickly, mumbling an apology, but he raised his hand to stop her. He asked in a calm voice where she had learned to play like that. Emily lowered her eyes and said she had not learned from anyone. She just listened sometimes. The man stared at her for a long moment, then said softly that her music was not like what he usually heard. It was raw and full of truth. He asked her name, and she said, "Emily Collins, the janitor's daughter." He looked surprised, but did not laugh. Instead, he nodded slowly and said she had a rare gift. At that moment, her father entered the hall carrying a mop. When he saw Emily standing near the piano and the famous musician looking at her, his heart sank. He thought his daughter had done something wrong and began to apologize, but the pianist smiled and said there was no need to be sorry. He turned to the director, who had just entered behind him, and said that the girl must play again. The director looked confused but agreed, since the great Adrien had requested it. Emily stood frozen, afraid and shy. Her father whispered that it was all right, and that she should play. The hall filled again with teachers, students, and musicians who had returned from their break, curious to see what was happening. She sat again at the piano, her hands shaking. She pressed the first note and then another, and soon she was lost again in her music. The sound filled every corner of the room, and everyone listened without breathing. When she finished, there was a long silence. No one spoke for a moment. Then the applause came loud and long, filling the air with joy. Her father stood beside her, speechless with pride and disbelief. Tears filled his eyes as he realized that his little girl, who had always been quiet and shy, had done something extraordinary. The famous pianist walked toward her and said that talent like hers should never be hidden. He told the director to let her study at the academy and promised to help her learn properly. The director agreed at once because he too was amazed by what he had heard. Emily stood there, still unable to believe what had just happened. Her father held her hand tightly and whispered that he was proud of her. She smiled shyly and looked at the piano once more, feeling that her life had changed forever. That night when they went home, she could not sleep. She kept hearing the sound of her own music echoing in her head, and she knew that from that day forward, nothing would ever be the same for her or for her father. The morning after that unforgettable night, Emily woke up early and sat near the window of their small house. She could still hear the echo of the music in her mind. The sound of the applause and the way people had looked at her would not go away. She had never imagined that something like that could happen to her. She had only been a janitor's daughter who liked to listen to music while waiting for her father, but now she had played in front of great musicians and had been praised by the famous Adrien Leclerc. She looked at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. They were small and thin, yet they had made music that had touched so many people. Her father was already awake, preparing for work. He looked at her with a proud smile, but also with a little fear, because he still could not believe what was happening. He kept asking himself if it was real, or if someone would soon tell them it was all a dream. He told her to get ready, because the director of the academy had asked to see them again that morning. They walked together through the quiet streets to the academy. Emily felt nervous. She had never been called to an office before, and now the director himself wanted to meet her. When they reached the large doors, the guard, who usually ignored them, greeted them politely and told them to go in. That small change made Mr. Collins realize that something had truly changed in their lives. Inside the building, everything looked different. The teachers who used to walk past them without a word now smiled at Emily. Some of the students whispered and pointed, but not in a cruel way. They had heard the story of the janitor's daughter who had played like a master without ever learning music. When they entered the director's office, Adrien Leclerc was already there, sitting calmly with his hands folded. The director smiled warmly and asked Emily to sit. She sat down quietly, her father standing beside her. The director spoke kindly, telling her that the academy wanted to offer her a full scholarship so she could learn music properly. He said that her gift was something special and should not be wasted. Mr. Collins could not speak at first. He had never thought his daughter would ever study in a place like this, and for free. Emily looked at the director with wide eyes. She felt her throat tighten as she whispered a thank you. Adrien smiled and said she had to promise one thing, that she would never stop playing with her heart, because that was what made her different from everyone else. From that day, Emily's life changed completely. She was no longer only the janitor's daughter. She was now a student of the Grand Academy. Her first day was both exciting and scary. She wore a simple dress while the other students wore fine clothes. She carried an old notebook while they had expensive music sheets, but she did not care. She only cared about the piano. When she walked into the classroom for the first time, everyone stared at her. Some were curious, some jealous, and a few were kind. The teacher, a kind woman named Miss Green, welcomed her and introduced her to the class as a student with natural talent. Emily blushed but smiled shyly. The lessons began and she listened carefully to every word. Every time she touched the piano, the room fell silent. Her playing was not perfect, but it had feeling, something that even the best students could not copy. Her days were filled with practice and study. She woke early and stayed late learning scales, notes, and rhythm. She wanted to understand everything that before she had only felt. She worked harder than anyone else because she knew this chance was a gift and she did not want to lose it. Her father still worked as the janitor, and every evening after her classes, she helped him clean. She said it reminded her of where she came from. The teachers admired her effort, and even the director often came to listen quietly outside the door when she practiced. Sometimes Adrien Leclerc himself visited the academy and gave her private lessons. He taught her not just about notes, but about emotion and storytelling. Through music, he told her that great music was not about perfection but about truth. She listened to him carefully, and each lesson made her better. But not everyone liked her. Some students could not accept that a girl with no training could play better than those who had studied for years. A few whispered behind her back, saying she was lucky, or that Adrien liked her too much. Emily tried to ignore them, but sometimes their words hurt. She did not show it, though. She kept her focus on her music and her dream. Her father noticed her sadness once and told her that people only talk about those who shine, and that she should keep shining no matter what. She hugged him and promised she would. Weeks passed, and Emily improved quickly. The teachers were amazed at how fast she learned. She could now read music and understand complex pieces. She practiced for hours each day and sometimes even forgot to eat. The piano became her world. Every sound, every touch, every mistake mattered to her. Her fingers became stronger. Her confidence grew and her eyes sparkled whenever she played. She started performing small pieces in class, and each time the applause grew louder. The same students who had once doubted her began to respect her. Slowly, she became one of the best in the academy, not because of her background or connections, but because of her heart. One afternoon, as she practiced alone in the main hall, she noticed someone standing near the back. It was Adrien. He listened quietly, without interrupting. When she finished, he walked up to her and said she had made great progress, but reminded her again that the most important thing was to never forget who she was. He told her that many musicians lose themselves in fame and forget the reason they started playing. He wanted her to stay pure, to always play for love, not for praise. She nodded deeply, understanding his words. He then told her that in a few months there would be a special performance at the academy, where all students would play in front of a large audience, including famous musicians and journalists. He said he wanted her to perform her own composition, something that came from her heart. The thought of it made her both excited and afraid. She had never composed, something on her own, but she promised she would try. That night she told her father about it while they walked home under the streetlights. He smiled proudly and said he had no doubt she would do well. He told her that when she played, he could feel everything she felt without understanding a single note. She laughed softly and said she played for him more than anyone else. Because of him, she had discovered her love for music. If he had not brought her to the academy every evening, she might never have found this dream. In the following weeks, Emily began writing her first composition. She spent hours at the piano experimenting with notes and sounds. Sometimes she grew frustrated and cried quietly when things did not sound right. But she never gave up. She remembered Adrian's words about playing from the heart and her father's encouragement about never quitting. Slowly, her melody began to take shape. It was soft and emotional, full of memories of her childhood, the long nights, waiting in the corner, the sound of her father's broom, the echo of students' laughter and her own secret dreams. When she played it, she could see her life in every note. She decided to name it The Silent Hall, because that was where her journey had begun. As the day of the performance came closer, everyone in the academy talked about it. The hall was being decorated, the stage prepared, and the excitement grew. Emily felt nervous, but she also felt ready. She had worked harder than ever, and she knew this was her chance to show that dreams could come true even for someone who started with nothing. Her father bought her a simple new dress with his savings and told her that when she sat at the piano she should forget everyone around and play like she was alone in the hall again. She smiled and promised she would. The night before the concert, Emily went to the empty hall alone. She sat at the piano and played her piece one last time. The sound echoed through the darkness, just as it had the first night she had secretly touched the keys. She closed her eyes and remembered everything that had happened, how she had once been afraid to even touch the piano. And now she was about to perform on stage as a real musician. When she finished, she stayed still for a long moment, feeling grateful. She whispered softly, thanking her father and the music that had found her. That night she slept peacefully, knowing that whatever happened the next day, she had already achieved something bigger than she had ever dreamed. The day of the grand concert arrived and the whole academy was full of excitement. The hall was decorated with golden lights and shining curtains. The air was filled with the sound of voices, laughter, and instruments being tuned. The famous guests were already arriving in their elegant clothes, and the students were busy checking their notes and rehearsing quietly. Emily stood near the backstage holding her small music sheet. Her heart was beating so fast that she could almost hear it louder than the noise around her. She wore a simple white dress that her father had bought her. It was not fancy like the others, but it looked graceful on her and made her feel special. Mr. Collins stood near the corner of the hall wearing his old uniform. He was supposed to help the cleaning staff, but the director had told him to stay and watch his daughter perform. He could not believe how far she had come in such a short time. As the concert began, the director gave a small speech welcoming the guests and speaking proudly about the students of the academy. One by one, the students came on stage and performed beautifully. Some played violins, some played cellos, some sang, and some played the piano. Each one received warm applause from the audience. Emily watched them quietly from behind the curtain. Her fingers kept trembling as she held them together. She whispered softly to herself, trying to calm down. She remembered her father's words from the night before, telling her to play as if she was alone in the hall and not to think about anyone else. She took a deep breath and waited for her turn. When her name was finally announced, there was a sudden hush in the hall. The director's voice was warm as he introduced her. He said this next performance was from a young girl who had joined the academy only a few months ago, and whose story had already inspired everyone. He said her name was Emily Collins, the daughter of their beloved janitor, and the piece she would perform was her own composition titled The Silent Hall. The audience clapped politely as Emily walked onto the stage. Her heart pounded and her legs felt weak, but she kept walking step by step toward the grand piano. She could see the bright lights and the crowd sitting in front of her. She knew that somewhere among them were famous musicians, critics, and even Adrian Leclerc himself. She saw her father near the side, his eyes full of tears and pride. Emily sat down on the piano bench and placed her hands gently on the keys. For a brief moment she closed her eyes and let the silence fill the hall. It was the same kind of silence she had always loved when she used to sit alone, waiting for her father to finish his work. It felt familiar and safe. Then she pressed the first key. The sound floated through the hall like a soft whisper, and every person in the room fell quiet. The melody began slow and gentle like a memory. Her fingers moved smoothly across the keys, creating music that was full of warmth and emotion. It was not a piece made to show off skill, but to tell a story. The audience could feel that story with every note. It spoke of quiet nights of hidden dreams of love between a father and daughter, of hope, rising from the simplest of places. As she played on, her confidence grew. Her fear slowly melted away, replaced by the deep feeling that had always lived. Inside her, she forgot about the crowd and the lights. She forgot that she was being watched by hundreds of eyes. She was again that little girl in the empty hall, playing for no one but herself and the shadows on the walls. Each note flowed naturally, like a river finding its way home. Her small hands moved gracefully. Her eyes closed, her heart wide open. The melody rose higher and stronger, filling the hall with something that touched everyone listening. Some of the guests leaned forward, unable to look away. A few wiped tears from their eyes. Adrian, who sat in the front row, closed his eyes and smiled, proud and amazed at how much she had grown. When she reached the middle of the piece, the music changed. It became more powerful and emotional, like the sound of struggle and hope fighting together. She remembered all the moments of her life when she had been afraid to dream, when she had seen her father working late at night, when she had played secretly in the dark. She put all of that into her music. It was not just sound anymore, it was her story, her life, her heart. She pressed the keys with strength and love until her whole body felt like part of the instrument. Then slowly she brought the melody down again, soft and calm, like the end of a long journey. The last few notes echoed gently through the hall before fading away into silence. For a moment, no one moved. The hall was completely still, as if time had stopped. Emily sat frozen, afraid to look up. Then suddenly, the audience began to clap. It started softly, then grew louder and louder until it filled the whole hall. People stood up from their seats, clapping and cheering. The sound of applause was so strong that Emily felt dizzy. She looked up and saw everyone standing, including the director, the teachers, the students, and all the famous guests. Her father was clapping the hardest, his eyes full of tears. Adrian stood with him, smiling proudly. Emily's face turned red and she bowed shyly. The director came on stage and took her hand, raising it toward the crowd. He said this was what true talent looked like, a gift born from the heart, not from wealth or privilege. The applause continued, and Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest that she would never forget. After the performance, many people came to speak to her. Some of the teachers congratulated her, saying she had made them proud. A few musicians told her that her piece was one of the most beautiful they had ever heard. Adrian came to her last. He looked at her with kind eyes and told her she had not only played a song, she had shared her soul. He said that this was only the beginning of her journey, and that the world would soon know her name. Emily could not stop smiling. She thanked him again for believing in her when no one else did. Her father came forward and hugged her tightly, whispering that he had never been so proud in his life. She held him close and said she had done it for him. The rest of the evening passed like a dream. After the concert ended, everyone gathered for dinner and celebration. The director announced that Emily's piece would be performed again at a national event, and that she would represent the Academy there. The news spread quickly, and everyone cheered Mr. Collins sat quietly at a corner, smiling and watching his daughter talk with teachers and musicians. He could still not believe this was the same little girl who used to wait for him every night with a small notebook and quiet eyes. Now she was standing among the best young musicians in the country. When they finally left the academy that night, the sky was full of stars. Emily held her father's hand as they walked home. The streets were silent, except for the sound of their footsteps. She felt light and peaceful. The image of the applauding crowd was still clear in her mind, but what made her happiest was the look on her father's face. He looked proud, content, and full of love. When they reached home, she sat by the small window again, looking at the stars. She thought about everything that had happened and how fast her life had changed. She knew this was only the beginning, but she also knew that no matter how far she went, she would never forget who she was or where she came from. She whispered softly to herself that she would always play from her heart and for the people she loved. Her father came to the doorway and watched her quietly, before saying that her mother would have been proud too. Emily smiled and nodded, quietly. She sat at the small old keyboard they had bought secondhand from the academy and began to play again. The sound was soft and warm, filling their tiny home with peace. Her father listened with his eyes closed, feeling every note like a prayer. That night the world outside was silent, but inside that little house music lived, and it was more beautiful than ever. Days turned into weeks after Emily's great performance, and her life began to move faster than she had ever imagined. People who had been at the concert talked about her everywhere. Her name appeared in local newspapers and small music magazines, calling her the young genius with a golden heart. The Academy became proud of her and used her picture on their posters to show that true talent could be found anywhere. Students who once ignored her now wanted to sit with her and ask her how she learned to play that way. Teachers gave her extra time to practice, and some even helped her understand more about music theory. Adrian Leclerc, who had become her mentor, continued to visit the academy once every few weeks to teach her privately. He said that she had a gift that must be protected with patience and hard work, and she listened to him carefully because she respected him deeply. She wanted to learn everything she could so that she could one day make her own music known to the world. Her father continued working at the academy as always, but now people treated him differently. The same teachers who once walked past him without greeting now smiled and thanked him for raising such a wonderful daughter. The students no longer called him the janitor. They called him Mr. Collins, with respect. He felt shy about it, but also happy. He often said that Emily's success belonged to both of them because she had grown up around his hard work, and she had turned that into music. He still stayed late every night to clean. But Emily often came to help him after her classes. She said that no matter what happened, she wanted to keep doing that because it reminded her of where she started. Together, they cleaned the hall where she had first played in secret, and sometimes after work, she sat at the piano again and played softly for her father. The music was like a gift for both of them, something that connected their hearts. One afternoon, the director called Emily and her father into his office again. He told them that a famous national competition for young musicians was going to be held in the capital city, and the academy had chosen Emily to represent them. Her father was speechless for a moment, then his eyes filled with tears. The director explained that many great judges would be there, including famous composers and producers who could change her life forever. If they liked her music, Emily felt a mix of fear and excitement. She had never been out of town before, and the thought of performing in front of so many strangers made her heart race. But she also knew she could not refuse this chance. She thanked the director and promised to do her best. The following days were filled with preparation. Adrian returned to help her get ready. He told her that the competition was not only about skill, but about feeling, because people could hear the difference between someone who played with heart and someone who played only to win. Emily understood his words and began to practice even more seriously. She decided to perform a new piece, one that she had started writing secretly. It was inspired by her life, her father, and the memory of her first night playing alone in the hall. She spent hours working on it, sometimes until late at night, while her father waited nearby. When she finally finished the piece, she played it for him. He listened silently, his hands folded over his chest, his eyes wet. When she was done, he said it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. The day of the journey came, and Emily and her father packed their small bags. The academy gave them tickets for the train and a hotel room in the city. It was the first time they had ever traveled together. Emily watched the world pass by through the window, feeling both nervous and happy. The city was huge, bright and full of noise. Nothing like their quiet town. The competition was being held in a grand concert hall with shining lights and tall marble pillars. Musicians from all over the country had come, and many of them looked confident, wearing expensive clothes and carrying their instruments with pride. Emily felt small among them, but her father put his hand on her shoulder and told her to remember that she belonged there just like anyone else. When the competition began, she sat backstage watching the other contestants perform. Some were very skilled, playing complicated pieces perfectly, but she noticed something missing in many of them. Their music sounded beautiful, but cold, as if they were only playing for the judges and not for themselves. When her name was finally called, she walked onto the stage feeling the familiar fear rise inside her, but also the same quiet strength that had carried her before. The lights were bright, and the hall was full. She could not see her father among the crowd, but she knew he was there listening. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the piano. Then she remembered Adrian's words about feeling not fear, and she began to play. The first notes came out soft and slow. The sound echoed gently through the hall, and everyone grew silent. The piece she had written was called Heart of Silence. It told her story without words. The melody rose and fell with the same rhythm as her, life, each note carrying a piece of her soul. The music spoke of love, struggle, hope, and gratitude. Her fingers moved smoothly across the keys, her eyes closed as she poured her emotions into every sound. People in the audience leaned forward, unable to look away. Some of them closed their eyes to feel the music more deeply. By the time she reached the final part of her piece, the hall was completely silent except for her piano. The last few notes faded slowly into the air, and then everything went still. For a few seconds, no one moved or spoke. Then suddenly the hall erupted in applause louder than she had ever heard before. The judges stood clapping, some even smiling through tears. Her father stood up from his seat, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He could not stop clapping. His little girl had done it again. Emily bowed deeply, her cheeks red with emotion and tears shining in her eyes. She had played her heart out, and she could feel that everyone had understood her story. When she walked off the stage, the other contestants came to her, some congratulating her sincerely, others too surprised to speak. The judges later announced that she had won first place and would receive a scholarship to continue her music studies anywhere she wished. The crowd cheered again, and photographers rushed to take pictures. Her father hugged her tightly, whispering that dreams were truly real if you believed in them. That night they went back to the hotel room still. Full of joy, Emily sat by the window looking at the city lights below, and her father sat beside her holding her hand. He told her that he had never thought life could change so quickly, but that he was proud, not because she had won, but because she had stayed humble and kind. She smiled and told him that everything she had done was for him, because he had always believed in her even when no one else did. They stayed up late, talking about the past, about the nights in the empty hall, and about the future that now looked bright and full of promise. When they returned home, the academy held a small celebration for her. The director gave a speech saying that Emily had become an inspiration for every student, and that her story proved that true music came from the heart, not from money or background. Adrian sent her a letter saying that she was ready to face the world and that he was proud to have been her teacher. She kept that letter safely in her notebook and read it whenever she felt unsure or afraid. The town where they lived began to talk about her everywhere. People stopped her father in the street to shake his hand and tell him how lucky he was. Emily stayed the same, simple, humble, and full of love. She kept practicing, every day helping her father in the evenings and dreaming quietly about what might come next. As time went on, she started to receive invitations from other cities to perform. Her music began to spread through recordings, and people from far away wanted to meet the young pianist whose story touched every heart. But no matter where she went or how big the stage became, she always remembered the small hall where it all began, and the man who had believed in her from the start. Her father would often remind her that fame was not the goal, that the real victory was in touching people's hearts, and she agreed completely. Every time she sat at a piano, she thought of that first night when she had dared to press a single key, and how that simple sound had changed everything forever. Years passed after Emily's victory at the national competition, and her life slowly became something she had never dreamed of. She started performing in many places across the country. Each concert bigger than the last. She was invited to perform at festivals in large cities, and people came just to hear her play the piano. Her name appeared in newspapers and on posters, and people called her the girl who played from the heart. She still lived a simple life with her father, who never left her side. He continued to work part-time at the academy, even when Emily offered to take care of everything, because he said that work kept him grounded and close to the place where it had all begun. Every evening, after work, he would sit in their small living room listening to Emily practice, and the sound of the piano filled their home with warmth. Emily never forgot what her father had taught her about humility. She always said that her success was not only hers but also his, because without him she would have never touched a piano. She often returned to the academy to meet new students and tell them her story. Many of them looked up to her with admiration, and she always told them to play with feeling and never give up no matter how hard life seemed. The academy's director had become one of her biggest supporters and often invited her to perform at events to inspire the younger ones. She accepted every invitation with a smile, because she knew how important hope was for people who dreamed like she once did. One day she received a letter from a famous European music school inviting her to join as a special guest performer and student. The school was in Vienna, a city known for its deep connection to classical music. At first she was afraid to go so far from home, but her father encouraged her, saying that the world needed to hear her music. He told her that even though he would miss her, he wanted her to follow her dreams without fear. After many late-night talks, she agreed to go. It was hard for both of them when the day came for her to leave. They stood at the train station holding hands silently. The train whistle blew, and Emily hugged him tightly, promising that she would make him proud. He told her that he already was proud, and that no matter where she went, she would always carry his love with her. The journey to Vienna was long and full of thoughts. She watched the landscapes change from small towns to big cities, and then to beautiful countryside. She felt nervous but also excited. When she arrived, the city took her breath away. The streets were full of music artists and beautiful old buildings. She stayed in a small apartment near the music school and started her classes the next day. Her teachers were impressed by her natural talent and emotional depth. They said she played differently from most students because every note she played had a story behind it. She worked hard every day, practicing for hours and learning new techniques. But sometimes late at night she would sit by the window and think about her father. She missed him terribly and often wrote him long letters telling him about everything. After a few months, she was invited to perform at a large concert in Vienna. It was a special event attended by famous composers and musicians from around the world. Emily knew this was one of the biggest moments of her life. She decided to play the same piece she had written years ago called Heart of Silence because it reminded her of her journey. She practiced it again and again, wanting it to sound perfect, but more importantly, to feel alive. The night of the concert, she stood backstage, her hands cold, her heart beating fast. She could hear the murmur of the audience and the sound of the orchestra warming up. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage and took her seat at the piano. The lights were bright, and the hall was silent. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes filled the hall like a soft whisper. The sound of her piano was clear and pure. She closed her eyes and let her emotions guide her. The music spoke of love, of pain, and of hope. The audience listened in complete silence, moved by the sincerity of her playing. Every note carried a memory of her father, of the empty academy hall, of the night she had first played in secret. When the final note faded into the air, the silence that followed felt deep and full. Then came a wave of applause that seemed endless. People stood up clapping and cheering. Her teachers smiled proudly, and one of the famous composers even wiped a tear from his eye. After the concert, many came to congratulate her, saying that her music had touched their souls. Emily thanked them humbly, but in her heart she knew she had played for one person, only her father. Back home, her father read about the concert in a newspaper article sent by the academy. He carried the clipping in his pocket everywhere he went. He missed Emily deeply, But every time he read her letters or listened to her old recordings, he felt close to her. He often told his friends that her music was like light and that it reminded him that even from the darkest places, beauty could rise one day. The academy director invited him to speak at an event about Emily's journey. He stood nervously in front of the students and told them how proud he was of his daughter and how her story showed that no dream was too small if one had faith and courage. The students clapped for him, and he felt something he had never felt before, a deep sense of peace knowing that his hard life had been worth every moment. Meanwhile, Emily continued to grow as an artist. She began composing new music inspired by her life in Vienna. Each piece told a different story about longing, belonging, and hope. Her teachers encouraged her to record her first album, which she named Home of Music. She said the name was for her father because he was her first home. The album became popular among listeners and critics alike. People said that her music had a unique purity that reminded them of why they fell in love with music in the first place. Soon she began traveling to other countries to perform, and everywhere she went, people were touched by her humility and warmth. But even in the middle of her success, she never forgot her promise to return home. She wrote to her father saying that after one more tour she would come back to visit. She missed the small town, the smell of the old piano hall, and the evenings when they talked about simple things. Her father wrote back telling her that he would wait for her no matter how long it took, and that he had kept the piano keys shining just for her. His letter made her cry softly because she could imagine him cleaning the hall alone, as he had always done. She promised herself that she would go back soon and play for him again. Months passed, and her concerts continued. She performed in Paris, London, and Rome, and everywhere she went, people stood in silence as she played. One evening after a concert, she received a call from the academy director back home. His voice sounded soft and a little sad. He told her that her father had fallen ill and was resting in the hospital. Emily felt her world stop. She booked the first flight home and traveled all night without sleeping. Her heart was heavy with fear. When she arrived, she rushed straight to the hospital. Her father was lying in bed looking weak, but when he saw her, he smiled and said that he knew she would come. She held his hand tightly, tears falling down her cheeks, and told him that she had come back, just like she promised. She stayed by his side for days, playing soft music on a small keyboard she had brought with her. The doctor said that his condition was serious, but that hearing her music made him smile. He told her that he was proud beyond words, and that no matter what happened, her music would always keep him alive in some way. One evening, as she played the same song she had once written for him, he closed his eyes peacefully, listening to the melody Emily played until the last note faded, knowing that he had heard her heart once again. Her tears fell silently as she whispered that everything she was and everything she would ever be was because of him after his passing. Emily decided to honor his memory in the only way she knew, through music. She returned to Vienna and began working on a new composition dedicated to her father. She called it the Janitor's Song. It was a piece full of love, gratitude, and memories. She performed it for the first time in a quiet concert hall where the lights were dim and the air was still. As she played, she could almost feel her father's presence beside her, like he had never left. The audience listened in silence, and when she finished, many had tears in their eyes. Emily stood slowly, bowed, and smiled softly because she knew that somewhere her father was still listening, proud of his little girl who had turned her pain into something beautiful. Years went by, and Emily's music became known all over the world. But her heart always stayed the same. She was still the same gentle and humble girl who once sat quietly in the corner of the music academy, waiting for her father to finish work. Her fame grew with time, and she started receiving invitations from famous orchestras and music festivals across many countries, but she never forgot where she came from and never allowed pride to take over her heart. Each time she played the piano, she thought about her father, his old broom, his quiet smile, and his kind eyes that always believed in her even when the world did not. She had now moved to a small house outside Vienna, where she kept her father's old photo and his janitor uniform hanging on a chair beside the piano. She played every morning. Her days were filled with music teaching and writing new pieces. She had also started giving free lessons to poor children who could not afford to learn. She told them that everyone had music inside their hearts. They just needed someone to help them find it. Her students loved her not only for her talent but also for her kindness. She treated each of them like they were special, and she listened to them carefully. She often shared stories about her father and how he had taught her that even a small act of love could create something beautiful in the world. One afternoon, she received a letter from the music academy back in her hometown. The director wrote that the academy was celebrating its 100th anniversary, and they wanted her to come back as the guest of honor to perform at the main event. The letter also said that the concert would be dedicated to her father for his years of service and for inspiring generations through his daughter's story. When Emily read the letter, she felt her heart ache with both happiness and sadness. She had not been back home since her father's passing, and the thought of returning to the same place where everything had begun filled her with deep emotion. She decided that she would go. When the day of her journey came, she packed her bags carefully. She took with her the same music notebook her father had once given her and the last piece she had written for him called The Janitor's Song. The train ride back home felt like traveling through time. She looked out the window at the familiar fields and small towns, and memories flooded her mind of the nights she had waited quietly for her father in the academy hall. The closer she got to her hometown, the more her heart felt heavy but also warm. When she finally arrived, she saw that many things had changed, but the people still remembered her. Everyone in town welcomed her kindly, and the academy students looked at her with wide eyes, full of admiration. The night of the concert came quickly. The academy hall was beautifully decorated with lights, flowers, and photos showing its long history. At the center of the stage stood a grand piano polished to a shine. There was a small plaque on the wall beside it that said, "In memory of Mr. Collins, whose dedication and love gave the world the gift of Emily Collins." The sight of those words brought tears to her eyes. The hall was filled with people from everywhere, some of her old teachers, students, and many townsfolk who had known her father. The director greeted her with warmth and thanked her for returning. He said that the night was not only about celebrating music, but also about honoring a man who had taught everyone that greatness could come from the simplest hearts. When it was time for her to perform, Emily took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The audience went silent. The lights dimmed softly and she sat at the piano, placing her fingers gently on the keys. For a moment she closed her eyes and imagined her father standing by the door, holding his mop and smiling proudly. She began to play the janitor's song. The melody started quietly, full of warmth and tenderness, then slowly grew deeper and stronger with each note. It told the story of struggle, hope, and love. The audience could feel every emotion flowing through her fingers. It was as if she was not just playing music but telling her life story through sound. The music rose and fell like waves of memory, sometimes soft and gentle, like the nights she practiced alone, and sometimes strong and powerful like the day she first performed before the world. When the final notes began to fade, she lifted her hands slowly, letting the last sound linger in the air. The hall remained silent. No one dared to move. Then one by one people began to stand and clap. The applause grew louder and louder until it filled the entire room. Some had tears in their eyes and others simply smiled in awe. The director stepped onto the stage and embraced her, whispering that her father would have been the proudest man in the world that night. Emily smiled with tears streaming down her face and whispered softly that she knew he was there listening. After the concert, many people came to her to thank her for sharing such a beautiful story through music, but Emily stayed humble. She said that everything she did was a way of keeping her father's memory alive. She walked through the halls of the academy, touching the old walls and remembering the times she had walked there as a child. The same piano where she had first played in secret was still there, a little older, but full of life. She sat on its bench and played a few soft notes, smiling through her tears. She whispered to the piano that it was their story too, because it had been there from the beginning. The next morning she visited the small cemetery on the hill where her father was buried. She carried a small bouquet of white flowers and placed them on his grave. She sat beside it and talked to him like she used to. She told him about her journey, about all the places she had seen and the people she had met. She told him that his story had reached far corners of the world, and that everyone who heard her music knew about the kind man who once cleaned her floors in a music academy. She promised him that she would continue to play not for fame, but for love for the music that he had helped her find. She stayed there for a long time, listening to the wind that passed through the trees, and in that sound, she almost heard his voice saying that he was proud of her. When she returned to Vienna, she felt a new sense of peace. She continued teaching and composing, but her life took on a softer rhythm. She began working on a new piece called Songs of Home, a collection of melodies inspired by her childhood. Her students helped her record it, and when the album was released, it became one of her most loved works. People said it felt like listening to the sound of memories and hope. One of the tracks, The Hall of Light, was dedicated to the old academy where she had first discovered her gift. Every note in that song carried the feeling of those quiet nights when she sat alone and dreamed. Years later, when Emily grew older, she decided to start a foundation for young musicians from poor families. She named it the Collins Foundation in memory of her father. The goal was to give children with talent and dreams a chance to learn music, regardless of their background. She often visited the schools supported by her foundation and spent time with the children, teaching them and listening to their stories. She told them that music was not about fame or money, but about feeling and truth. She said that when you play from your heart, you,